Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our virtual panel on Pride and Advocacy. My name is Hunter Haas, and I'm a group contractor at Agency EA, and we're thrilled to welcome you to the discussion, along with our panelists joining in from around Chicago, who we'll welcome in just a minute. As a proud member of the LGBTQ+ community, I'm honored to be moderating this panel and helping to promote the voices of our participants. As a full-service brand experience agency, EA has witnessed firsthand the impact that COVID-19 has had on our industry. However, we also want to acknowledge that the last few months have brought significant change in the world, both personally and professionally. After we scheduled this panel, we witnessed the onset of an international movement sparked by the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others, amplified by numerous social injustices, police brutality, and systemic racism. We would be remiss not to acknowledge how the recent protests and riots, which continue as we speak, have generated important conversations and reflection and demanded accountability. Brands and agencies alike have joined the movement. While we cannot speak on behalf of our panelists participating today, EA stands in solidarity with the Black community and is taking action to fight racism and social injustice, promoting diversity within our organization. You can learn more about these efforts at agencyea.com. With that being said, there are great synergies between these conversations and the ability to open a dialogue around a cause to uplift a community. Today, we're focusing on the shift in Pride celebrations this year, both in how we are celebrating and what we are continuing to fight for. Each individual joining us today brings a different perspective, whether from a government and public service background to communication, the press, and nonprofit. A special thank you to our panelists for dedicating their time and sharing their insights. Thank you, everyone. First, I wanted to start with introductions. So can everyone introduce themselves, share the pronoun you identify with, and the organization that you are representing today? I'd like to start with Kim.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. My name is Kim Hunt, pronoun she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, which is a project of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, where I also serve as the Senior Director in the Policy and Advocacy Department.
Thank you for joining us. Lasaya, would you like to go next?
Sure, my name is Lasaya Wade. My name, long name.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Lasaya Wade. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Brave Space Alliance, and I go by she and they pronouns. Also a core member of BLM National and Local.
Great, thank you. Tracy?
My name's Tracy Boehm, she, her, and I'm the publisher of the Chicago Reader and founder of Windy City Times newspaper.
Great, thank you. And Mackenzie?
My name is Mackenzie Mack. I'm the Executive Director of Affinity Community Services, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Great, thank you. And then Jim?
My name is Jim Bennett. I use he pronouns, or whatever's used with respect, and I'm the Director of the Illinois Department of Human Rights, a state agency.
Great, thank you all for joining us. As you can see, we wanted to bring together a diverse group of people with different backgrounds and experiences, so excited to kick this off. The first question we want to start with is, what has been a challenge or struggle that you have overcome, whether that's professional or personal, or truly the intersection of the two? And to kick it off, we'd like to start with Lasaya.
We could talk about many different things, correct? But as a Black trans queer person, I think it has always been heavy to be a big body Black trans woman in any type of space, especially taken seriously as my education and also taken seriously around my advocacy and activism work. A lot of the cases when trans women are in spaces, we're not treated as full grown adults, and I'm here to change that narrative.
Thank you. Tracy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know that a lot of my experiences would have been more challenging had I been born a person of color. The challenges I have primarily faced are as a woman, and in particular, the LGBTQ community, as it's now known, but when I came up in it, it was primarily just called the gay community. The sexism was brutal. Not that it isn't today, but it was even more so in 1984 when I was coming out, and doing the work I do in journalism was made that much harder. So I think just staying with it despite the people who want you out is really a challenge I think probably all of us have faced at some point in our community. There is no real gay community. It's a whole lot of different communities within one. And so I think the biggest challenge I faced was not allowing those people who didn't want me in it to win. So consistently over 36 years.
Thank you. And Jim?
I would probably say, I'm probably older, so for me, I came out at the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and so I worked at the Red Cross at the time. Red Cross played its own role in that epidemic, and so to be part of that and to be losing friends as I was sort of coming into my own, I would say that was probably the greatest challenge. But to be honest, and sort of following up on what Tracy said, my path is easier. Again, I'm a white guy, and I can and that privilege has a power that has to be recognized.
Definitely. Appreciate you adding that context. Kim, can you go next?
Sure. It's, hard to name one struggle. I'm a 58-year-old Black queer woman, so pick one. This, and then, we're in a global pandemic in the midst of everything else. So sometimes just getting up is a struggle. Definitely continuing to do the work during really challenging times that are personal as well as political is a struggle. So, not that there isn't joy, there's lots of joy, but there are many struggles too.
And then Mackenzie.
If you hear my guinea pigs in the background, please ignore those sounds. I think, just to sort of echo what Kim said and what Lasaya said, for me, I think it's just multiple layers. So I won't say that I've overcome these things, right? The intersection of dealing with anti-Black racism, of dealing with homophobia, of dealing with transphobia as a non-binary person, that these aren't things that I've overcome, but they're things that I've made a commitment to doing my very best to dismantle in community. So I recognize that there probably won't be a day where I say, okay, well, I'm so happy that I no longer have to deal with racism, homophobia, and transphobia in my lifetime. But I'm fighting for a future where potentially someone, a long time from now, who's a Black, queer, non-binary person would be able to at least experience a better sort of lived life because of the work that so many activists and organizers, specifically Black women, are doing right now. So that's something that I would say is that sort of experience with that intersection of my identities, with not just those three, but other identities as well. And then I think in addition to that, this pressure that we often put on people to choose one identity or to choose one struggle, even though that's not possible. So for me, it's navigating those spaces and always sort of putting whatever makes me feel most whole and most myself, putting that first. I'm putting my well-being and safety over other people's comfort.
Thank you for that. I think, as I referenced earlier, you all bring such a different perspective, and kind of keeping that in mind. And as you referenced, the challenges that are ongoing and continue to, plague our community and continue to be a struggle. What does Pride Month mean to each of you? How do you, represent it? How do you participate in it? And again, I think if we can go back, Mackenzie, if you could kick us off, just, what has Pride Month meant to you in the past, and then what does it mean to you, this year?
Okay, Hunter, you got me going first on this question.
Yeah.
For me, Pride means a protest, baby. That's like how I feel. And it feels like, I feel so much of a deep sort of connection to protest. And I feel such a deep connection to mobilization, which I think is interesting because I know there's folks of varied experiences, and specifically non-Black folks of color and white folks too. When we are in protest and we're protesting anti-Black racism, when we're protesting the murders of Black trans women who might feel like, oh wow, protest feels scary to me, or protest feels like violent to me. And for me, I see protest as a celebration of life and of humanity, where I will not allow anyone to disrespect me, and I will not allow anyone to disrespect Black people, Black queer people, Black trans people. And by me setting that very firm boundary via mobilization, via the organizing of my community and other communities, I'm making it very clear what my boundaries are, making it very clear that I respect myself and that I honor and celebrate Black LGBTQ people and then LGBTQ people as a whole community.
Thank you for that. And then Kim, can you add your thoughts as well?
Can I just echo what Mackenzie said? I wish I had that eloquence around this. Pride has meant different things to me at different times in my life. When I first came out, you know, it was definitely a celebration and an embracing of this other part of my identity that I didn't feel comfortable or allowed to express. And over the years, it has been more of sort of a note to or a reminder of the struggles that all LGBTQ people have faced, but in particular, as you know, I've done different work like at Affinity and at Pride Action Tank, trying to bring the lens of other parts of the LGBTQ community to the front, because it hasn't always been front and center. Some Pride events have been very, very white and very cisgender, gay, male, and hasn't always been super comfortable. And now as I'm aging and doing more work with LGBTQ older adults, I'm finding that that is also a missing element of the Pride celebrations. So for me, it's becoming more and more, personally, it is just a reminder to remember sort of the struggles that have come before. But I'm proud every day, not just in June. And so that's something that I carry with me throughout the year. But then that work around bringing marginalized groups back to the center is just a constant thing that has to happen besides in June.
Definitely. And Tracy, can you add your thoughts?
Yeah, it was interesting when June 1st happened this year and I started to get requests for things like this, which I did because I know Danitza.
Yeah.
I actually turned down a lot of these this month because I'm not feeling very prideful these days. And part of it is this accumulative notion of what the LGBTQ community has been in terms of covering it over the years. And I say that as someone from a journalistic perspective who has witnessed the good and the bad and the horrible in our LGBT community, including extremely, you know, racist stuff that goes on in the community. Just very recently, in, you know, a lesbian bar owner, fortunately it was protested. I don't know 5 years ago if that would have happened, but she was protested for saying very racist stuff on social media. And just a year or so ago, a gay bar on Halsted was protested for its racial, racist stuff that was said about music. So within our gay community, it's hard sometimes to manage to be prideful. But at the same time, my whole identity in life is around that community. So I can find the pockets of pride by looking at the people versus the movement. And so the people on this call and the people that I have admired over the years that do the work every day and work through that burnout and work through that real horrible stuff within our community give me hope that our community, you know, we're made up of marginalized people at different levels. And it's just shocking to me how the lack of empathy to other marginalized communities when you're from one. I just don't get it. I grew up very differently. My mother, you know, was covering Martin Luther King in the 60s. So I heard about the Marquette protests from her as a photographer and reporter covering those things. So it's very foreign to me, this concept that you don't have empathy for other people at all. But if you're marginalized and you don't have empathy, I just don't know where it comes from. So I've been having a hard time coming up with pride this month. And it's the people that keep me focused on that when the movement lets me down.
Thank you. Jim?
I mean, to me, it's been visibility more than anything else. I've worked for Lambda Legal for, over a decade before this position. And this is the time we were at, in every redneck, community that we could go to be visible in June. And so the whole month was places like being in South Dakota when they were trying to ban trans, or Indiana when we were fighting at the time Governor Pence. And in those smaller communities, it really meant something to be able to go out, like at Indianapolis or in Fargo or some of these places, and really be visible. And the community didn't divide as much as it does in Chicago, where everyone can find their tribe and stay with it. And we used, I've always seen Pride as whatever we're fighting for at that moment, as the place to try to reach the masses and elevate the conversation. So most of my time for Pride has been spent outside of Chicago, but I certainly share the feelings of almost everyone on the panel, or everyone on the panel, I believe.
Thank you. And Lasaya?
I have a hard disconnection with Pride. Pride was taken from us. As a Black trans woman, Pride was never an inclusive space for us. We started it off as mothers to this community, and that title was snatched. And then when we were dying on the ground, and as our blood shed, there was no outcry during Pride, unless there was a fundraiser for an organization that was ran by a cis white person. So Pride in the beginning was a riot, and that's exactly how I see it as. And when Black people were fighting against, as we see the president that's in the office now, and these particular leaders that we have in offices throughout this country, when Black people was rioting, that's when I see Pride. That's when I seen my liberation. That's when I seen I see a glimpse of liberation and what's happening right now. Pride Month is very weird because not only I get to celebrate my transness in a way, but I also get to celebrate my Blackness on June 19th, where I'm able to just sit back and relax and realize, like, I am an intersection of my history, where my history was erased not only from me being trans with 51 years ago, but me also being trans 450 years ago with Mary Jones. So it's a deeper connection, it's a deeper understanding for myself.
Thank you for that. And can you just, you referenced June 19th, can you share with the audience a little bit more about that date and the importance of that date?
So I'm not here for a history lesson. I think people just need to look up June 19th, okay. And that information is clear and open to everyone to look that up. I'm not here to teach you around Blackness unless I'm teaching my Black children around Blackness. And that's just importance to me for that day.
Okay, well, thank you. And I referenced earlier that I am incredibly impressed with this panel and this group of people and what you've accomplished. Can you also share if there's a role model or somebody in the community that you've looked up to in the past who's helped guide your path or motivated you in a different way? And for this one, if we could start with Tracy.
Sure. You know, when I was coming up, I started at age 21 at Gay Life newspaper in '84. And I was, in retrospect, I'm really shocked at how open and welcoming I was, especially within the older lesbian community. People like Vernita Gray, Mona Noriega, and Renee Hanover would take the time to share stories with me about prior generations and the work that they were doing. And in a very non-judgmental way, they let me make my mistakes and learn from them, and really just honored that I was able to meet and be mentored by this older generation. And as Jim referenced, it was also a time when AIDS started to strike down so many in our community, and I can still see many of the faces of the men, and it was mostly men at the time, that were out talking about living with HIV/AIDS, and them sharing their stories with me. Someone like Robert Ford, who was the publisher of Thing magazine, Dr. Ron Sable from Cook County Hospital. These older generations, some cases just slightly older, that were giving their lives really to make sure our community was stronger, had its rights. So I just feel very fortunate at the moment of time I came out and got to meet people who didn't make it out of the 1980s. and yet were willing to share their lives.
Thank you. And then Lasaya?
Oh, I can name off a list. I am lucky to have a community that feeds me. And what I mean by feed me with intelligence, feed me with resources, feed me with all types of greatness. We have 3 people that I've looked up here in Chicago on the panel that has led the way to open what BSA is doing right now. Historically, I've named her before, Mary Jones was the first Black trans woman to be documented in US history to actually fight against the country around her transness. Glitz, Black trans woman, I call her mother in New York, Cheyenne. She taught me that sex workers are women, and we if we want to do sex work and get paid for doing sex work, let us do so. Valerie Spencer in California, another mother of mine, a Black trans woman that was the first Black trans woman to do stage plays as a trans woman and continues to teach people across the country. I'm very lucky to have elders that not only lift me, but also give me what I need to make sure not only I continue to survive, but also thrive doing the work that I do.
Thank you. And then Kim?
Yeah, there are so many. Many of the people on the panel, I don't know Mackenzie as well, but will, and I'm looking forward to that. I will say some of the folks who are really sustaining me now, who I look up to, are what I would call my sister circle, and we have a group chat and check in with each other several times a day, and that includes Imani Rupert Gordon, the former ED of Affinity and now at National Center for Lesbian Rights, Kelly Suzanne Salisbury, who is at the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, Jackie Boyd, the founder of the CARE Plan, and Charlene Crothers, who has done amazing work through BYP 100 and the Movement for Black Lives. And so these are all women who, like I said, we connect several times a day. We push each other through hard times. We celebrate each other's joy. They're all queer women. They're all doing amazing things. And I am in awe of each of them, and they keep me sustained.
Thank you. And you referenced, obviously, group chats and text messages in, obviously, the presence of COVID-19. Are there different techniques or tactics that you're using to stay connected to some of these people?
Yeah, a lot more Zoom calls, that's for sure. Zoom happy hours, Zoom check-ins. This group checks in every Sunday. So that's something that I look forward to really kick off in my week and kick off the new week. So yeah, all the tech tools.
Okay. And Jim, can you share with us any of your role models in the community?
They're also on this call.
Yeah.
It's all women. Tracy Bain is one of the first people I met when I moved here. She hired me to do a radio show and forced me to get the issues. It took her a while, but we got there. And Vernita Gray was my next door neighbor when I moved to Chicago, and she invited me to my first Pride. And I didn't realize she was a legend until probably our first year after hanging out, and meeting everyone in her living room. And then going to Lambda Legal, I worked for the 2 women that opened that office, Mona Noriega and Patricia Logue, and they were the rare 2 that had been able to move a national organization on issues around race and equity before anyone was talking about it. And they've been everyone's been part of my life since. And Kim Hunt and I are on the phone more than she would probably like. But so I have an amazing group of people that both hold me accountable and are there for me anytime I need help.
Great.
I hope I do the same.
Okay. Mackenzie?
I thought you'd forget about me, Hunter.
No.
My list is long, and it's mostly Black women and Black non-binary people who held the vision for me before I could hold it for myself. That's something that one of my mentors, Desiree Attaway, always says and talks about. Is what does it mean when we're in community with one another to hold a vision before we can sort of hold it for ourselves, or if we can hold it for others before they can hold it for themselves. So that's been really big for me. So I could really, go down a long list of people who have been there for me, who have supported me, and I think also who held me up when I felt like my world had ended. And I think everybody on this call knows that Black women are amazing and brilliant and incredible. And that Black women carry not only the Black community, they carry our society, period. And are the reason why we've even been able to get to this point in activism across various intersections of activisms, because of the work of Black trans women, because of the work of Black queer women, who have led the way for us and who have held us up when we couldn't hold ourselves. So for me, it's a very, very, very long list.
Thank you. And then some of you have referenced, but obviously the tone and the goals of Pride have shifted over time, are shifting, specifically this year due to the social climate that we're currently in, as well as being part of a pandemic right now. Can you let us know how your goals are shifting a little bit this year, how you are potentially adjusting your voice and your message, and if you have any recommendations on how other people can raise their voices, especially for people of color, and how can they amplify those voices. So Kim, if you can get us started again, just kind of how the goals for this year for Pride are shifting a little bit.
I was hoping you would start with someone else.
Anybody's very excited, feel free to jump in, but otherwise.
I don't know how the goals for other people's Pride are changing. My goals have not changed. My goals have been what they are. Centering Black people has always been important to me. I think, for others who are organizing various Pride events, there's a different urgency that they have glommed onto or realized around centering Black people and other marginalized groups within LGBTQ communities. But yeah, it's not different for me. It's helping other people get it. But that's been an ongoing thing as well.
And Jim?
I think we have an opening to educate more than I've seen in quite some time, where there's a willingness for people to understand that our entire movement started with a Black trans woman that threw the first brick, and we wouldn't exist without Black trans women. This movement would be nowhere. So I think people are finally starting to see those parallels, and I wouldn't say my goals have changed in much either. I mean, we've seen, especially with, this monstrous, the Trump-Pence administration that has worked from day one to, especially at the trans community, to just completely erase as if they hadn't existed. And so, to have this, shocking Supreme Court victory just a couple days ago, which is now gonna undo a lot of the damage that this administration has done. But we have a long road ahead, but we've been under extraordinary attack, and especially the trans community, since November 2016. So there's, if we don't see it as a protest now, we're fools.
Thank you for that. And then Tracy?
I think this is an opportunity for the community to shift. There's always been a complaint for the last decade or so about corporations taking over Pride. And I think since we're talking to a corporate environment today, I think it's important to talk about what that means for the LGBTQ community and also Black Lives Matter movement and other parallel social justice movements. Today, it was announced that Aunt Jemima is going away. There's a lot of horrible images and stereotypes and just leftover things from hundreds of years ago that continue to permeate the corporate capitalist environment these days. And while we're not shedding, that overnight, like capitalism is not going to shift overnight, despite a lot of people's dreams on this call, we have to shift how they do that, what they do, and pressure them, and use this as an opportunity to not only defund police, but also take a more aggressive approach at corporations and governments who are using our dollars, whether that's consumer dollars or taxpayer dollars, in a way that is not just. And that is across systems, but it's also across, I'm from media, and I see that Facebook and Google are destroying local community voices and media. So my main mission this year and at the Chicago Reader and working with the Chicago Independent Media Alliance is to make sure that we are heard and that the authentic community voices by Latino community, Asian community, LGBTQ, African American, et cetera, are part of the landscape that isn't overlooked by corporate America. Walgreens is a great example. They get a lot of money from communities of color in Chicago, and do they put almost a dime into community media? No. So I think that we need to put lots of pressure across many points, and my point is in the journalism space. And I'm really hoping to take advantage of this moment to make that shift.
Thank you. And then Lasaya?
Tired.
Yeah.
I am exhausted. I have hit, I think last Friday I had hit a point of, I'm not Wonder Woman. I'm not her. I'm not her. We want to idolize trans women in a way that we become stronger than what we actually really are, and we're human just like everyone else, and we get tired. I'm trying not to break down, but because it brings us to a point that it takes us to be beheaded for you to see who we are. Yeah, I am in that point of like, when is enough to really understand that we are who we are, and when will you allow us just to be us and live our life the way we want to live our lives? I believe Tracy said it best, is when will the corporate world divest is important, divest in uplifting a white supremacist narrative within the LGBT population, where they can invest into Black LGBT ran spaces like Affinity, like Brave Space, that have been here for years, but never truly been invested in, to actually push liberation in our own communities. We've been at survival states for so long, it has become exhausting. So most of what I'm saying today is, enough is enough for your words. I want to see your actions into place, because a lot of us here in Chicago is not having it anymore. And if you do not bring action into your words, trust me, your companies will not be allowed in certain spaces.
And then Mackenzie.
For sharing that, Lasaya. I think before I answer, I just want to note, especially for those folks who'll be watching this after the fact, that a Black trans woman just said, I am exhausted and I'm tired. And that I think that I don't want to just jump into my answer after that has been said, because I want to acknowledge that. And I want you to know that I hear you, that I care deeply about you, and that I know that you're tired. And I thank you for all of the labor that you're extending for all of us, for this movement. And I also implore you to rest when you can, to let us know what you need so that you can rest even if it's just for a day, a few days. Hey, you know what? I'll be beside Wade for a day. I'll answer some emails, okay? And show you that love and support. But I think it's just important that I not jump into my answer without really acknowledging that you've said that, and that is important, and that that matters. So thank you for sharing that and being so honest. Now I'll go to my response, which I think echoes what Kim Hunt said, which is, for me, I've been doing anti-racism work, racial justice work for a decade. So my goals haven't changed. My goal has always been to dismantle white supremacy, to dismantle white supremacy culture. And that was my goal before I even knew that there was a terminology for it, before I even knew that that was a concept or that had a name. So that continues to be my goal. I think the only goals that potentially have changed might be fundraising goals have amplified for in this new role that I'm in at Affinity Community Services. That's probably the only goal that has changed. That's going up in the best way. And I think that's because there's amplified awareness. And for those folks, I think, who are in a space, specifically white people who are in a space where they're saying, well, now I realize racism is such a major issue. Or now I realize, you know, I've had the privilege to not be thinking about the ways in which we are systemically and intentionally and individually and interpersonally violent, for example, to Black trans women. I've had the privilege to not have to think about that. But now that I'm thinking about it, I want to do something about it. And I have resources, and I want to put money specifically in Black-led LGBTQ organizations. Race-Based Alliance would be a great place for that money, right? Let's get some more jobs at Race-Based Alliance so that we don't have a few Black trans people who are doing that work. Let's do that. There's funds that can be put into a number of other organizations. Clearly, I'm biased towards Affinity Community Services as well. But for me, I'm thinking about how folks with the resources who are like, I need time to figure this out and process it. It's like, okay, we respect that you need that time. And also, if you have the resources, put it into organizations that have been doing the work, that know how to sort of spend that money in such a way where they're dismantling these oppressive cultures and where they're dismantling these systems of harm. Because Black folks can't wait, you know, for the processing to be complete. Black queer folks, Black trans people can't wait for 6 months when you have a better understanding of how you're complicit in racism. You do that work, and in the meantime, support these organizations so that, you know, just like Lisaya said, we're human beings. We're not superhumans, and we have a limited capacity, and we need support. You know, I'll be the first person to say, hey, we need support. We need help. We need advice sometimes, like depending on very specific sort of ways in which we're doing our work, or very specific ways in which we're strategizing, right? So offer that, or ask us what we need so that we can be supported and so that we don't disappear, right? We don't go away. So that would be my answer.
No, thank you for that. And thank you again for taking that time to pause for Lisaya as well. I think that's such an important statement and such a good transition to the next segment, which is what can members of the Chicago community do to support the LGBTQ community, obviously, as well as you know, members of your communities and the communities that are represented on this call. You know, people I think are looking for that guidance, and as you mentioned, you know, everybody needs to do that soul searching on their own and find that for themselves. But if you have any recommendations or any actions that you would recommend individuals can take today, would love to hear that as well. And Tracy, if we can start with you, that'd be great.
Well, write a check. As Mackenzie said, take the time to learn, but write the checks. A lot of times corporations have volunteer days, but what they don't understand is that very small organizations can't take advantage of that. That's actually more work. And stuffing bags of gifts and things like that. It can be helpful for, like, let's say a shelter at holidays, right? But those things often really aren't what is needed. It really is cash on the ground and connections to your clients. And so, for example, Agency AAA is fantastic at, I mean, you are, I think, best in the nation at doing events, right? Well, you have the ability, once in 2021 things come back, to offer those services, to be the kind of, create these amazing experiences as your donor, you know, donation, right? The people that you have on your teams create great virtual and real experiences. But you also have corporate clients, and those corporate clients need you to tell them these things, because sometimes the people within those corporations don't have the agency to do that. But you, as an outside advisor, can take this opportunity to say, we think your event will be better if you also have this give back component that isn't to the typical multi-million-dollar threshold agencies out there, but rather is to the Chicago Bond Fund, or to Black Lives Matter, or Affinity, or Brave Space Alliance, or Chicago Black Lesbians and Gays. There is an organization at every level that can do the work that these companies think they need to do internally, but give that money externally. And it's very frustrating because agencies in the corporate world, being so conservative, have really done a disservice to their customers and their own employees by not being bolder. So I think as an advisor to corporate clients, you have an amazing opportunity to bring them into the fold on this, to give money to organizations that are smaller and mid-size, where that dollar impacts far greater than giving to a $40 million agency.
Definitely. And thank you for that. Kim?
Wow, everything Tracy just said. And I think, you know, a couple of other things come to mind too. LGBTQ organizations absolutely need to be funded. And I think there's also a role for individuals and organizations or companies to play a greater role in public policy advocacy as well. We have seen this federal administration, as Jim pointed out, just gut just about all the advances that have been made over the last 20 years at the federal level. Love the Supreme Court decision that occurred Monday. I'm actually shocked by it, given the number of conservatives on the bench. But in the same stroke, the administration changed administrative rules that were beneficial to LGBTQ communities. So it's been one step forward, 3 steps back since 2016. So there's a role there, absolutely. But I think also looking internally within corporations, there are LGBTQ employees present, and these are not always welcoming environments for LGBTQ people. And then when we layer on race and other identities, there's just a lot of work that needs to be done within corporations too, but there's definitely work that individuals can do. Writing the check is a big one, but also educating yourself. And this is a moment. There's tons of resources, new resources, old resources to help folks learn. But also there's a role for corporations to really move beyond the rhetoric of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually do the deep dive on anti-Blackness and racism, and really have those super hard conversations within their agencies. So that's what I have to offer.
No, thank you for that incredibly important information. Jim?
I mean, a couple things. I think for corporations, you've seen some places where like NCAA just refused to go to Indiana until they reversed some of their religious freedom law. Same with Salesforce, where they stopped building on their training center in different places. So I think there is a role when we hold those companies accountable, because politicians respond to money, and so when the money's pulled away from them, they respond. I think especially in the moments of the Black Lives Matter protest, we can stop asking what to do and just give money to the Black-led organizations. They don't need any more advice. Like they're doing the work out there. I've seen LaSalle on a lot of town halls, so I'm getting my answer down. But they write the check, and then ultimately, I would say, especially as we're going into this election, I mean, we have to change what's happening, obviously, at a federal level. But look at where these these police chiefs are who hires them, and it's mayors and it's state's attorneys. And so those are the races we need to pay attention to, and we have enough time to alter the path. Politicians are listening now, and there's a pressure we should put on them. And in Chicago and in Illinois, Representative Lamont Robinson is calling for a special session specifically to deal around reforming and dismantling the police culture. And this is the time to hold those folks accountable as well. And I'd say from a state agency, all of us, I'm paid by the taxpayers, so you better be damn sure that the Department of Human Rights should be responsive to what the people need.
Thank you for that. And then you kind of teed up Lasaya, but Lasaya, is there anything else that you'd like to add here?
I want to echo what everyone has said, but also add on reoccurring investment. Not just write a check, continuously write a check, right? I can continuously ask for money, but I don't want to continuously ask for money. I want to know February the 28th of every year, there's a $20,000 donation, or 30 or 40 or 50, whatever that you can actually give to the organization. But I also want to remind you, $20,000 is just a gift, not a sustainable donation. So yeah, I want to echo that also, but continuously invest in the work that we do, and also ask the organizations that you have invested in, see what they can do to help you dismantle the racism, white supremacy that you have in your space. So yeah, I think that everyone said what that needs to be said.
Yeah, and then Mackenzie, you kicked this off and sort of helped us transition into this topic, but is there anything else that you wanted to add in this space as well?
I think when you all do the editing, you can just put continuously write a check above
Okay.
here, and just sort of quote Lasaya, and that would be my response as well. And I thank everyone for their responses. I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then I wanted to give us one more question and just give everybody the opportunity. Obviously, we talked about promoting causes and awareness, but if there's anything else specific to your organization, around the movement, around Pride, around anything that you want to make sure that you can share with our audience or get across, I wanted to open it up a little bit just for kind of final thoughts. So if we can start again back at the top, but Kim, if you could kind of kick us off with just any final thoughts that you wanted to share today.
I hate being first on this question. Yeah, final thoughts. Well, I think, we're all experiencing this moment in different ways. I've seen this quote on social media that we're all in the same storm, but in different boats. And one, we need to recognize that, but two, we also need to understand that this storm is a moment. What are we doing to build to the other side of this? And how do we want to be as individuals and communities and organizations and corporations and that kind of thing? This is a great upheaval of learning and opportunity in the midst of all the pain and sorrow that is happening right now. And I think we really, as we deal with this, also need to continue to think about the future and how we can be different and how we can be better as individuals and institutions. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm grappling with as I also live in this moment and trying to do work in this moment, and also amplify the work of those on this panel and in other places. It's like, what are we building towards? What are we trying to do? How are we going to be different? And how do we not continue to create moments that are going to blow up again, and really get to what Martin Luther King would call the beloved community. I think of it as the beloved community 2.0 because he lived in a different world that we're in. But we really have got to do better as a human species in the United States, since that's where we are right now. We have got to really seriously grapple with this race question. because that impacts everything else, all the other identities. This country was built on a racist premise, and until we deal with that, we're going to continue to see uprisings of various sorts. And if we can't deal with anti-Blackness here, it's going to be so hard to deal with all the other issues around identity that we face as a nation.
Definitely. And then Mackenzie.
Oh, wow, I'm second. I think maybe something that I would leave folks with is the fact that we do this work together, never alone and never in isolation. And the goal is not to sort of pedestal one person over us all and to depend on that one person to make a change structurally and institutionally, interpersonally. But the goal is for us to develop a foundation that really is rooted in a pro-Black politic, that is rooted in a pro-trans politic, that's rooted in a pro sort of like liberation politic, that we can all sort of use as a foundation to continue moving forward. And so for me, it would be, how are you as an individual engaging in this work in community, and then contributing to that community in such a way where it makes us even more powerful as a whole, as opposed to it being focused on what we're doing individually only.
Thank you for that. Messiah.
So we're fundraising $100 million. I just want to put that in there. That's my plug. I'm just going to be honest about that. In this moment right now, we are literally the only Black-led, trans-led in the Midwest that is doing what we're doing, and also serving close to 15,000 people throughout Chicago. And food on the ground to make sure people have food during COVID. And to be able to sustain that, we have to raise the money to be able to have a permanent pantry, and also make sure our space is able to withhold this food and also the resources for community. So right now, we need a check. We need a few checks. If y'all want to give us $8 million, that will sustain us for the next 10 years. And I think it's honest to be in this moment to say what we need, and saying telling you what's happening. I need $8 million. And if your companies would like to be able to put your logos on our website of a liberated organization, do so. So I just think that's important right now. I have moved into a point of I am tired of being passive on particular things. And as organizations up here, we need to let you know what we need. And this is the one thing that we need right now. And we need to make sure that we thrive and survive during this particular pandemic and also political crisis that we're in.
Absolutely. Jim? Jim, can you want to share your final thoughts?
Are you saying Kim or Jim?
Sorry, Jim. Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Look how respectful I was being, Kim. Yeah. Well, I mean, so we're coming from a state agency. It's, government's sort of a different beast, and so for us, I think there's really ingrained ways of how the government works. And so small changes can have a huge impact in many different directions. For us, the Illinois human rights law is the best in the country in a completely unbiased way. It provides the most level of protections and the most comprehensive. And right now we have a very supportive administration and Governor Pritzker and Lieutenant Governor Stratton. And so we have to use those opportunities. And so, like, for example, with the rule where the federal government is saying that HHS does not have to provide coverage. In Illinois, that is not the case. It is illegal to discriminate on healthcare in Illinois, regardless of who you are, and that includes the trans community. We're working with the Department of Insurance. It expect to release guidance on Friday to make sure that people understand no matter what's happening nationwide in Illinois, you are covered. And for us, and the thing that you could do best to support us is when you have a case of discrimination on any of the protected classes, because usually it's intersectional, right? It's like you don't know if they're discriminating against you because you're Black or trans or both. You know, there's very hard to pull apart. So we want those cases before us. So if it happens and you feel you're discriminated against, to file a complaint and move forward on the investigation, because we have to hold folks accountable for their actions.
Absolutely. And then Tracy?
I would say that to be more intentional in your policies and your use of both your hiring policies, but also your vendor hiring policies on an individual basis on where you shop, where you go to restaurants, support small businesses and especially African-American owned businesses in Chicago get very little support from the corporations. A lot of times it's because there's these barriers for smaller nonprofits and smaller businesses that they can't jump through the same hurdles that big companies and nonprofits can. So make sure your policies are not a barrier for participation. An example is if someone's not a 501c3 yet, well, then put marketing dollars into that organization instead of saying it has to be a tax deduction, right? Using vendors that are smaller for your catering opportunities. Make sure that everything you do at every level of your company is intentional and proactively anti-racist, anti-homophobic, anti-transgender bias, etc. So that's a huge, profound shift if corporations do that. Tens of billions of dollars pass through Chicago through government contracts and corporate contracts every year. If you're more intentional in your vendors and your hiring, you're going to make a profound shift in the economics of that underlie a lot of the poverty issues that are facing communities of color in Chicago.
Well, thank you all for sharing that. I just wanted to wrap at this point. Again, thank our panelists. The work you're doing, the awareness that you're raising is incredibly profound. And as I referenced at the beginning, I'm incredibly humbled to be part of this panel today. So thank you for all of you watching. If you would like to learn more about the topics we discussed or the organizations that are represented today, we are providing links in the video description as well as on all of our social channels. So please click on those, learn more about these organizations and these incredible people, because they're helping to make a huge difference. So thank you again, and I really appreciate everybody participating.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, bye.